The moment I saw my retirement account balance had plummeted to $847 was the moment I stopped believing in unconditional family loyalty. For 28 years, I'd prioritized my children's needs above my own, even as a single mother working multiple jobs. I'd put Mark through medical school and helped Diane with the down payment on her dream house. I'd given them everything, my time, my energy, my savings, and they repaid me by draining the $340,000 I'd carefully saved for my golden years, while telling me it was for safekeeping. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't know was that Frank Reynolds, my former employer of 15 years, had taught me more than just business administration. He'd also taught me to document everything and trust no one completely, not even family. So when Mark and Diane thought they'd secured their financial future at the expense of mine, they had no idea I was already 10 steps ahead, with evidence that would make even the most composed lawyer raise their eyebrows in disbelief. I never dreamed I'd have to protect myself from my own flesh and blood, but looking back, maybe I should have seen it coming. The small comments about my unnecessary spending, their increased interest in my finances after Frank announced his retirement gift to me. But nothing prepared me for discovering that the children I'd raised to be honest, ethical adults would betray me so completely, or for the calculated decision I made next that would change all of our lives forever. My name is Barbara Wilson. At 63, I'd spent nearly 3 decades building a life that revolved around my children. After my husband James died unexpectedly, when Mark was only 10 and Diane just 8, I'd stepped up and taken on both parental roles without complaint. We lived in Cedar Springs, a middle-class suburb outside of Lakewood, where the homes were modest but respectable, and everyone knew their neighbor's business whether you wanted them to or not. I'd worked as an executive assistant at Reynolds Development Group for 15 years, where Frank Reynolds had become something of a mentor to me. In the beginning, I was just grateful for the steady paycheck and health insurance that allowed me to support my children as a single mother. But over time, Frank recognized my potential and promoted me to office manager, then to administrative director. The higher salary meant I could finally start building a proper retirement fund, something I'd neglected during the early years when every spare dollar went toward braces, school supplies, and college savings accounts for Mark and Diane. "Barbara," Frank would tell me during our monthly reviews, "you're taking care of everyone except yourself. You need to think about your future too." At his insistence, I started maximizing my 401k contributions, and he even matched them at a higher percentage than company policy dictated. "Consider it an investment in someone who's made this company run smoothly for years," he'd say whenever I protested. By the time Mark finished medical school and began his residency, I'd managed to accumulate just over $340,000 in my retirement accounts. It wasn't a fortune, but combined with my pension and Social Security, it would be enough for me to live comfortably without working myself to the bone into my 70s. I'd planned to retire at 65, maybe travel a little, take those art classes I'd always been interested in, and finally have time to breathe. When Frank announced his retirement last year, he called me into his office with an unusual solemnity. "Barbara, I'm selling the company," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that familiar way. "But I wanted to tell you personally before the announcement goes out." My heart sank. A new owner might clean house, especially with higher salaried employees like me. "Don't look so worried," Frank continued, sliding a folder across his desk. "I've arranged a separate retirement package for you. You've been the backbone of this place for 15 years. I'm not leaving without making sure you're taken care of." Inside the folder was a document outlining a private retirement bonus, $75,000 to be paid directly to me upon Frank's official retirement date, with no strings attached. I nearly cried with gratitude. This would push my retirement savings over $400,000, a number that had seemed impossible when I was juggling mortgage payments and college tuition. That evening, I invited Mark and Diane over for dinner to share my good news. Mark arrived first with his wife Jessica, who worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep. They'd been married 3 years, but had yet to give me grandchildren. Something Jessica's mother, Eleanor, never failed to bring up at family gatherings. "Mark, Jess, you won't believe what happened today," I said, practically bouncing as I poured them each a glass of the nicer wine I'd splurged on to celebrate. Mark smiled indulgently. "Did you finally decide to sell this house? It's way too big for just you, Mom." I waved him off. "No, it's about Frank's retirement. He's giving me a $75,000 bonus. Can you believe it? With that and my retirement accounts, I'll have over $400,000 saved up." Jessica's eyebrows shot up. $400,000? That's impressive for someone in your position. Before I could process the backhanded compliment, Diane and Paul arrived with a bottle of grocery store wine and takeout dessert. Diane worked as a middle school English teacher, and Paul was in sales at a local electronics company. They'd bought their house last year with my help, $30,000 toward their down payment, which they'd insisted was just a temporary loan that they'd pay back as soon as things stabilized. "Sorry we're late," Diane said, kissing my cheek. "Parent-teacher conferences ran long. What are we celebrating?" I repeated my news, watching their faces carefully. Diane looked genuinely happy for me, but Paul's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "That's amazing, Mom," Diane said, hugging me. "You deserve it after everything you've done for us." $400,000, Paul repeated, in the same tone Jessica had used. "And you're still planning to work 2 more years?" "That's the plan," I confirmed. "Though maybe I'll cut back to 4 days a week. Frank's bonus gives me some breathing room." Mark set his wine glass down with a deliberate click. "Mom, have you talked to a financial advisor recently? The market's been volatile, and with inflation, I'm not sure that amount will last as long as you think." "I've been working with Kevin at the credit union," I replied, slightly defensive. "He says I'm on track, especially with my pension." "Kevin Morris?" Jessica asked. "At Lakewood Credit Union? He's barely qualified, Mom. You need someone who specializes in retirement planning, not a glorified bank teller." The conversation quickly deteriorated from there, with both Mark and Jessica insisting that my financial plan was inadequate, while Paul peppered me with questions about where I was keeping my money and whether I'd considered more aggressive investment strategies. Only Diane seemed uncomfortable with the direction of the discussion. "Guys, can we just celebrate Mom's good news? She's worked hard for this." "We're celebrating by making sure she doesn't lose it all to poor management," Mark countered. "Mom, I've got a colleague whose brother is a wealth management specialist at Meridian Partners. You should really talk to him." By the end of dinner, what should have been a joyful evening had turned into an intervention about my supposedly precarious financial future. I sent them home with leftover lasagna and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, then sat alone at my kitchen table wondering why my children seemed more concerned about my money than my happiness. Over the next few weeks, the calls and visits increased. Mark stopped by unexpectedly on a Tuesday evening, bringing printed materials about investment strategies and retirement planning. "I've been doing some research," he said, spreading papers across my coffee table. "You're really not maximizing your potential returns." Diane and Paul invited me to dinner at their house that weekend, where Paul casually mentioned that his company's 401k program allowed family participants. "We could roll your accounts into our family plan," he suggested. "The fees are lower, and the returns have been consistently good." Even Jessica called to recommend a financial planner she knew from college. "He specializes in helping people in your situation," she said, though she didn't specify exactly what my situation was. Their sudden interest in my financial well-being might have seemed touching if it hadn't been so persistent. And if I hadn't caught Mark rifling through my home office during a Sunday visit, my retirement account statement spread across my desk. Just trying to get a better picture of what we're working with, he explained when I confronted him, not even having the decency to look embarrassed. Mom, you're not getting any younger, and healthcare costs alone could wipe out your, savings if you're not properly prepared. Something about his tone raised alarms I couldn't quite articulate. It felt less like concern and more like... Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Coveting. But I dismissed the thought almost immediately. These were my children, the same ones I'd nursed through chickenpox and driven to countless soccer practices, the same ones whose college tuition payments had kept me awake at night, calculating and recalculating my budget to make it all work. Frank's retirement party came in mid-August, a lavish affair at the Lakewood Country Club with an open bar and a jazz quartet. Patricia, his wife of 40 years, had spared no expense in celebrating his transition from company president to full-time golfer. I wore a navy blue dress I'd splurged on at Nordstrom and allowed myself to feel proud of what I'd accomplished, both professionally and personally. You raised those kids on your own and still managed to build a decent nest egg, Frank said, as we clinked champagne glasses. James would be proud of you, Barbara. The mention of my late husband brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I hope so, I said softly. Sometimes I wonder if I've done enough. Frank studied my face. Something? Bothering you? The kids okay? I hesitated, then shared my vague concerns about Mark and Diane's sudden interest in my finances. Frank listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. Barbara, he said finally, I don't want to overstep, but in my experience, when people start showing unusual interest in someone else's money, it's rarely for the benefit of the money's owner. They're my children, I protested weakly. They're adults with their own financial pressures, Frank countered. Mark's just starting his practice with medical school debt. Diane and Paul bought that house last year. Just promise me you'll... Be careful. Don't sign anything without having Timothy look it over. Timothy Grant was Frank's personal attorney, who had helped me with my will and power of attorney documents a few years earlier. I promised Frank I'd be cautious, though I still couldn't bring myself to believe my children might have ulterior motives. The retirement bonus was deposited into my checking account the following week, and I transferred most of it to my savings, planning to meet with Kevin at the credit union to discuss the best way to add it to my retirement portfolio. But before I could schedule that appointment, Mark called with an urgent request to meet for coffee. He was already waiting at our usual spot near the hospital when I arrived, 2 lattes on the table and an iPad propped up in front of him. His normally pristine white coat was wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Mom, he began without preamble, I need to talk to you about something serious. My heart immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios: cancer, divorce, some terrible medical mistake at work. What's wrong? Are you okay? He waved off my concern. It's not about me, it's about you. I've been consulting with some financial colleagues, and I'm really worried about your retirement funds. Mark, let me finish, he interrupted, turning the iPad toward me. On the screen was a news article about a regional bank failure and the resulting losses to certain account holders. This is happening more and more frequently. The banking system isn't as secure as people think, especially for retirees who don't have time to recover from market downturns or institutional collapses. I sipped my latte, trying to hide my irritation. The credit union has federal insurance and my investments are diversified. Kevin Morris isn't qualified to manage the kind of money you're dealing with now, Mark cut in. Mom, I've spoken with Diane and Paul, and we all agree it would be safer to consolidate your finances under professional management. And who would that be? I asked, already knowing the answer. Mark had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. We've set up a family trust with Meridian Partners. Your funds would be pooled with ours for better returns, but kept in separately tracked accounts. It's the safest option, especially with the market being so unpredictable. A family trust, I repeated slowly. And who would control this trust? We'd all be trustees, of course. You, me, Diane, Paul. We'd make decisions together, but the day-to-day management would be handled by professionals. What Mark was carefully not saying was that as trustees, they would have access to and control over my retirement savings, the money I'd sacrificed and saved for decades to accumulate. I took another sip of my latte, buying time to control my rising anger. I appreciate your concern, I said finally, keeping my voice level, but I'm comfortable with my current arrangements. Mark's expression hardened. Mom, this isn't a request. We're really worried about you. Your judgment hasn't been the best lately. Excuse me? You spent $300 on a dress for Frank's retirement party. You're talking about art classes and traveling. These aren't responsible choices for someone in your financial position. I stared at him, genuinely speechless. How did he even know? What I'd spent on my dress? And since when was taking an art class at the community center an irresponsible splurge? Mark, I've managed my money successfully for decades. I raised you and Diane, put you both through college, helped with your down payments and wedding costs, all while saving for my own retirement. I think I've demonstrated pretty solid financial judgment. His expression softened into something worse than anger, pity. Mom, that was different. Dad's life insurance helped, and you were younger then, sharper. We're just concerned about your vulnerability as you age. I felt as if I'd been slapped. I was 63, not 93. I worked full-time, managed a department of 8 people, and had a clearer mind than half the younger employees at Reynolds Development. And James's life insurance had barely covered the mortgage and immediate expenses after his death. Every dollar since had come from my own hard work. I need to go, I said abruptly, gathering my purse. We can discuss this another time. Mom? Mark reached for my arm, but I pulled away. Another time, I repeated firmly, and left without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Mark's words kept replaying in my mind, each iteration making me angrier than the last. Your judgment hasn't been the best lately. Your vulnerability as you age. We're really worried about you. Was this genuine concern, however misplaced, or something more sinister? I couldn't quite bring myself to believe my children would deliberately try to take advantage of me, but Frank's warning echoed in my thoughts. When people start showing unusual interest in someone else's money, it's rarely for the benefit of the money's owner. The next morning, I called the credit union to schedule an appointment with Kevin to review my accounts and discuss moving my funds to another institution, one my children wouldn't know about. But when I logged in to print my recent statements, I froze in shock. My retirement account balance, which should have shown just over $300,000 to $40,000, now displayed $847.12. My hands trembled as I navigated to the transaction history. 3 days earlier, the day after my coffee meeting with Mark, there had been a transfer of $339,152.88 to an external account I didn't recognize. The description simply read, Transfer to Family Trust Meridian Partners. I felt physically ill. Without my knowledge or consent, nearly all of my retirement savings had been moved to the family trust Mark had mentioned. But how? I hadn't signed anything or authorized any transfers. Then it hit me. The power of attorney documents I'd signed years ago, naming Mark as my financial agent in the event of my incapacity. Had he somehow used those to authorize the transfer? But I wasn't incapacitated. I was fully employed, mentally sharp, and in good health. I called the credit union immediately and was connected to Samantha Chen, the branch manager. Mrs. Wilson, she said, her voice careful and professional. I understand your concern, but the transfer was processed according to our protocols. We received the proper documentation. What documentation? I demanded. I didn't authorize any transfer. There was a pause before she continued. We received a notarized letter of authorization, along with copies of your power of attorney documents naming Dr. Wilson as your financial agent. Everything appeared to be in order. But I'm not incapacitated. The power of attorney isn't even in effect. Another pause. The letter indicated that you had been experiencing memory issues and cognitive decline, and that Dr. Wilson was acting in accordance with the POA's provisions, given his medical credentials and the documentation, provided we had no reason to question. I cut her off, my voice shaking with rage. I want to speak to your legal department immediately. My son has fraudulently transferred my retirement savings without my consent, and your bank facilitated it. Mrs. Wilson, please calm down. I understand you're upset, but I am not calming down, I said, enunciating each word clearly. Either connect me with your legal department, or I'll be contacting my attorney to initiate legal proceedings against both my son and your institution for fraud and negligence. The line went silent for a moment before Samantha spoke again, her tone noticeably more cautious. I'll transfer you to our legal department right away, Mrs. Wilson. As I waited on hold, I pulled out my cell phone and made another call to Timothy Grant, Frank's attorney. His secretary put me through immediately when I explained it was an emergency. Barbara? Timothy's voice was concerned. What's happened? In as steady a voice as I could manage, I explained the situation. Mark's increasing interest in my finances, the family trust proposal, and now the unauthorized transfer of my retirement savings. Timothy listened without interruption, then said 3 words that would change everything. I'm coming over. 45 minutes later, Timothy sat at my kitchen table, reviewing the account statements and power of attorney documents I'd printed out. His expression grew progressively grimmer with each page he turned. This is textbook financial elder abuse, he said finally, looking up at me with serious eyes. And frankly, it's fraud. You're clearly not incapacitated. The POA isn't in effect, and Mark had no legal right to transfer those funds without your explicit consent. Elder abuse? I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. But I'm his mother. Timothy's expression softened slightly. Unfortunately, family members are the most common perpetrators of elder financial abuse. They justify it by telling themselves they're protecting the person, or that they'll get the money eventually anyway. But make no mistake, Barbara, taking control of your assets without your knowledge or consent is both illegal and unethical, regardless of the relationship. What do I do? I asked, my voice small. Timothy closed the folder decisively. First, we file a police report for fraud. Then we send formal legal notices to both the credit union and Meridian Partners demanding immediate return of the funds. We also revoke the existing power of attorney and create new documents naming someone trustworthy, perhaps Frank, if he's willing, as your agent. And Mark? Diane? I couldn't keep the pain from my voice. That depends on how involved Diane was in this scheme, Timothy said gently. But Barbara, you need to understand something. This was not a misunderstanding, or an overprotective son making a mistake. The level of premeditation required to forge documentation, misrepresent your cognitive status, and coordinate with financial institutions indicates deliberate, calculated fraud. I nodded slowly, tears threatening, but not falling. Make the call. Timothy squeezed my hand briefly, then pulled out his phone and dialed. This is Timothy Grant, attorney at law. I need to report a case of financial elder abuse and fraud. As I listened to Timothy methodically outline my case to the police, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock and betrayal were giving way to something colder and more focused. Determination. My children had violated my trust in the most fundamental way possible, using my love for them as a weapon against me. Now they would learn that the mother who had sacrificed everything for their well-being was not someone to be underestimated or exploited. This was no longer just about my retirement savings. This was about justice, consequences, and teaching them the lesson I had apparently failed to instill through years of loving example: that integrity matters, and betrayal, especially of those who love you most, comes with a price. The Cedar. Springs Police Department was housed in a modest brick building downtown, its interior lit by flickering fluorescent lights that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor. Officer Ramirez led me to a small interview room where the institutional gray walls seemed to close in as I recounted the details of my case. Timothy sat beside me, occasionally supplementing my account with legal terminology I wouldn't have known to use. "So to be clear," Officer Ramirez said, reviewing his notes, "you believe your son, Dr. Mark Wilson, used an inactive power of attorney document to transfer $339,152.88 from your retirement account without your knowledge or consent?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The power of attorney was created years ago as a precaution, but it was only to be enacted if I became incapacitated, which I am clearly not. Officer Ramirez nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "And you had no discussions about transferring these funds to a family trust?" My son mentioned wanting to create a family trust during a conversation 2 days before the transfer, but I explicitly told him I wasn't interested. Timothy interjected smoothly, "Officer Ramirez, my client has been the victim of a sophisticated fraud scheme perpetrated by her son, who leveraged his position as a physician to falsely claim she was experiencing cognitive decline. This isn't a family misunderstanding. It's criminal fraud and elder financial abuse." The officer's pen paused over his notepad. "You understand that pursuing criminal charges against your son would likely result in his arrest and prosecution? As a physician, he could face additional professional consequences." I felt a momentary waver. This was Mark, my son, the little boy I'd raised alone, who'd crawled into my bed during thunderstorms and proudly shown me every gold star from elementary school. But then I remembered his cold words. "Your judgment hasn't been the best lately. We're really worried about you." The calculated way he'd undermined my autonomy, prepared for this theft, and lied about my mental capacity. "I understand," I said, firmly, "and I want to proceed." Officer Ramirez nodded once, then closed his notebook. "We'll open an investigation immediately. In the meantime, I suggest you contact any other financial institutions where you hold accounts to verify they haven't been compromised as well." That advice proved prescient. After leaving the police station, Timothy and I spent the afternoon making calls to my bank, investment firm, and even the company handling my pension. We discovered that while my checking and savings accounts appeared untouched, someone had recently requested copies of my pension plan documents, and the request had been made in my name. "They're laying groundwork," Timothy observed grimly, "gathering information they'd need to access your other assets." I felt sick. How far would they have gone if I hadn't caught them? Would they have gradually drained every account I owned, all while patting themselves on the back for protecting me? Timothy walked me through the process of placing fraud alerts and security freezes on my credit reports, changing all my passwords, and even requesting new debit and credit cards. By late afternoon, I was exhausted but fortified by the knowledge that I'd taken concrete steps to protect what remained of my financial independence. "What happens next?" I asked as Timothy prepared to leave. "I'll file emergency motions first, thing tomorrow morning to freeze the assets in the fraudulent trust account and demand their immediate return. We'll also send formal notification to Meridian Partners that the transfer was unauthorized and potentially criminal. They'll likely cooperate once they understand the legal implications. Financial firms don't want to be implicated in fraud cases. And Mark, Diane?" Timothy's expression softened. "The police will likely contact them within 48 hours. You should prepare yourself for their reaction." I didn't have to wait that long. At 7:30 that evening, my doorbell rang, with such insistence that it might have been an emergency. When I peered through the peephole, I saw Mark, Jessica, Diane, and Paul clustered on my front step, their expressions ranging from concerned to outright angry. Against my better judgment, and certainly against what Timothy would have advised, I opened the door. "What the hell, Mom?" Mark burst out before I could speak. "The credit union called me about suspicious activity and potential fraud on your accounts. What did you do?" The audacity of his question momentarily left me speechless. What had I done? "I think that's my question to you, Mark," I replied, my voice ice cold. "How exactly did $339,000 from my retirement account end up in a family trust I never authorized?" Diane stepped forward, her face a mask of concern that now struck me as completely artificial. "Mom, we were just trying to help. You've been so forgetful lately, and we were worried about you making financial mistakes." "Forgetful?" I echoed. "Name one instance." She faltered. "Well, you forgot Paul's birthday last month." "I didn't forget his birthday. I mailed a card with a check inside, which he cashed on his birthday. The bank statement shows it cleared on April 18th. Paul at least had the decency to look embarrassed. I thought Diane had sent it." "And you've been making poor decisions," Jessica interjected smoothly. "The money you spent on that retirement party dress, talking about traveling when inflation is so high." "Stop." I held up a hand. "Let's be very clear about what's happened here. Without my knowledge or consent, Mark used a power of attorney, document that isn't even in effect, to transfer nearly my entire retirement savings to an account I can't access. That's not helping. It's theft." Mark's face flushed red. "You're blowing this out of proportion. The money is still yours. It's just being properly managed now. If it's still mine, then transfer it back. Right now." An uncomfortable silence fell. Mark and Jessica exchanged glances while Diane studied her shoes. "It's not that simple," Mark finally said. "There are tax implications, transfer fees. Transfer it back." I enunciated each word with deadly precision. "Mom," Diane said, softly, stepping forward with her hands outstretched. "We're just worried about you. You're not thinking clearly about this." Something inside me snapped. "I've filed a police report naming Mark as the perpetrator of fraud and elder financial abuse. Timothy Grant is preparing emergency legal motions as we speak to freeze and recover the stolen funds. So unless you want to be added to that police report as co-conspirators, I suggest you all leave my property immediately." Their expressions transformed from righteous indignation to shock. "You called the police?" Mark's voice cracked. "On your own son?" "You stole my life savings," I replied evenly. "What did you expect me to do?" Jessica's face hardened. We're trying to protect you from yourself. This is how you repay our concern? By threatening Mark's medical license and our financial stability?" I looked at her coldly. "Your financial stability was never supposed to depend on stealing my retirement fund." Paul, who had remained largely silent, finally spoke up. "Mrs. Wilson, please. This is all a big misunderstanding. No one was stealing anything. The family trust was set up to benefit everyone, including you." "Really?" I crossed my arms. "Then show me the trust documents. Show me where it says, 'I retain full control of my portion of the assets.' Show me where it prevents the three of you from spending my money however you see fit." Another uncomfortable silence. "That's what I thought," I said. "Now get off my property before I call the police again, this time for trespassing." Diane's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, please, you can't be serious about this. We're your children." "And I raised you better than to become thieves," I replied, my voice finally breaking. "That's what makes this betrayal so much worse." Closed the door on their protests and sank to the floor, my back against the solid wood as tears finally overwhelmed me. On the other side, I could hear their muffled arguments, Mark insisting they needed to speak to their own lawyer, Jessica, demanding they leave before things escalated further, Diane sobbing about family loyalty. Eventually, the sounds of their cars starting and pulling away confirmed they had left, at least for now. I remained on the floor for what felt like hours, my mind cycling through decades of memories. Mark's high school graduation, Diane's wedding, countless Christmases and birthdays, moments I'd treasured as evidence of a family bond I thought was unbreakable. Had it all been an illusion? Or had something fundamental changed in my children that I'd been too blind to see? The next morning, I awoke to find 3 voicemails on my phone, one each from Mark, Diane, and surprisingly, Frank Reynolds. I listened to Frank's first. "Barbara, it's Frank. Timothy called and filled me in on what's happening. Patricia and I are absolutely appalled. We want you to know we're here for whatever you need. Moral support, a place to stay, anything at all. Call me back when you can." Frank's steady voice provided a much-needed reminder that not everyone in my life was capable of such betrayal. I saved his message and steeled myself to listen to my children's. Mark's came first. "Mom, you're overreacting and making a huge mistake. Call off the lawyers and the police, and we can sort this out as a family. If you push this, you're going to damage relationships beyond repair. Think about what you're doing." His tone was less angry than the night before, but the manipulation was still evident, the implication that I was the one damaging relationships, not the theft of my savings. Diane's message was tearful. "Mom, I didn't know exactly what Mark had done, I swear. I knew about the trust idea, but not that he'd moved. Your money without permission. Please call me back so we can talk. I love you." I wasn't sure whether to believe her. Had Diane truly been unaware of the extent of Mark's actions, or was she trying to distance herself now that there were potential legal consequences? I called Timothy first, bringing him up to speed on the confrontation. "You shouldn't have engaged with them directly," he admonished gently. "But what's done is done. The good news is we've already made progress. I spoke with Meridian Partners this morning, and once I explained the situation and mentioned potential criminal charges for facilitating fraud, they became remarkably cooperative." "What does that mean?" "It means they've frozen the trust, account pending investigation, and are reviewing all documentation related to the transfer. If, as we suspect, the authorization was fraudulent, they'll likely reverse the transaction without requiring a court order. They don't want the liability." Relief washed over me. "How soon?" "Could be days, could be weeks. Financial institutions move at their own pace, but I'm confident we'll recover your funds. In the meantime, the police investigation is proceeding. Detective Rivera has been assigned to your case. She specializes in financial crimes against seniors." After hanging up with Timothy, I called Frank back, grateful for his and Patricia's support. Then I steeled myself and dialed Diane's number. If there was any chance, she had been less involved, I wanted to know. She answered on the first ring. "Mom, I'm so glad you called. I've been worried sick." "I think we need to talk in person," I said cautiously. "Are you free this afternoon?" "Yes, absolutely. Should I come to your house?" I hesitated, not wanting another confrontation on my doorstep if Mark and Jessica decided to accompany her. "Let's meet at Riverside Park by the duck pond. 3:00. The park was one of my favorite places in Cedar Springs. Peaceful, public, and far enough from both our homes that a chance encounter with Mark was unlikely. I arrived early and claimed a bench overlooking the water, watching families feed. The ducks and elderly couples stroll arm in arm along the path. Diane arrived precisely at 3, alone and carrying 2 paper cups from my favorite coffee shop. She handed me one, a chai latte, my usual order, and sat beside me, leaving a careful distance between us. "Mom?" she began, her voice trembling slightly. I need you to know that I didn't know Mark had actually taken your money. I knew he was concerned about your retirement planning and wanted to set up some kind of family financial arrangement. But I had no idea he'd gone ahead and transferred your funds without permission. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Then why were you at my house last night defending his actions? She flinched. Mark called us in a panic, saying you were making accusations and threatening legal action. He made it sound like you'd misunderstood something he'd done to help you. By the time I realized what had actually happened, she trailed off, looking miserable. What had actually happened, I repeated slowly, is that your brother committed fraud and stole my retirement savings. Diane nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have realized something was wrong when he started talking about your declining judgment and being vulnerable to scammers. You've always been the sharpest person I know. Then why didn't you question him? She wiped her eyes. I guess I trusted him. He's a doctor. He's always been the responsible one, the planner. And lately, he's been under a lot of pressure. With the new practice and Jessica's family. That doesn't excuse theft, Diane. I know it doesn't, she said quickly. I'm not defending him. What he did was wrong, completely wrong. I want you to know I wasn't part of it, not knowingly. I sipped my chai, considering her words. Did you sign anything related to this family trust? She hesitated. Mark asked me to sign some paperwork about a month ago. He said, it was preliminary documentation for estate planning that would protect all of us, including you. I skimmed it, but it was full of legal jargon. My heart sank. So you did sign? Yes, she admitted, looking ashamed. But I swear I didn't. No, it would be used to take your money without your consent. I closed my eyes briefly, processing this information. Diane might not have orchestrated the fraud, but she had played a part, however unwittingly, by signing documents without fully understanding their purpose or implications. I believe that you didn't fully understand what you were signing, I said finally, but that doesn't change the fact that you participated in something that has caused me tremendous harm and betrayal. I know, she whispered, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I've already told Mark he needs to return your money immediately. All of it. No conditions. And his response? Diane looked away. He said it's more complicated than that there are legal and financial considerations that make an immediate reversal difficult. Of course he did. Mark was stalling, probably hoping I'd back down from pursuing criminal charges if he dragged his feet long enough. Well, he's right about one thing. There are legal considerations now, just not the ones he's thinking of. Diane's eyes widened. Mom, are you really going through with pressing charges? It could destroy his career, his entire life. I felt a flash of anger. And what about my life, Diane? What about the retirement I worked decades to secure? What about the trust I placed in both of you? I know, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply your feelings don't matter. It's just such a drastic step. The drastic step was stealing $339,000 from your mother, I said flatly. Everything that follows is simply the natural consequence of that choice. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching a family of ducks glide across the pond's surface. Finally, Diane spoke again, her voice small. What can I do to help make this right? I considered her question carefully. If you truly weren't aware of Mark's plan to transfer my money without consent, then tell that to the detective who contacts you. Be honest about what you knew and when. And if you genuinely want to make amends, return the $30,000 I gave you for your down payment, the loan you've never made a payment on. Her face paled. Mom, we don't have that kind of liquid cash right now. The house, Paul's car loan. Then sell something, I replied without sympathy. Or take out a home equity loan. Figure it out, Diane. That's what adults do when they owe someone money. She nodded slowly, looking chastened. Okay, we'll find a way. I promise. One more thing, I added. I want you to go through your emails, text messages, any communication, with Mark about my finances or this family trust. Forward everything to Detective Rivera when she contacts you. You really think she'll contact me? I know she will. This is a criminal investigation now, not a family disagreement. Diane winced but nodded again. I understand. As we prepared to leave, she reached out tentatively and touched my arm. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive us? Maybe not now, but someday. I looked at my daughter, the little girl who once made me handprint Mother's Day cards. Now a grown woman who had participated, however peripherally, in a scheme to take control of my life savings. I don't know, I answered honestly. Trust, once broken, is very difficult to rebuild. But I do know this. Forgiveness, if it comes, will only be possible after accountability and restitution. Diane's eyes filled with tears again, but she nodded. I understand. And Mom? For what it's worth, I really am sorry. I believed she was, but sorry wouldn't restore my retirement account or erase the knowledge that my children had seen me as a financial resource to be controlled rather than a person deserving of respect and autonomy. The next week passed in a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and sleepless nights. Detective Rivera turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense attitude and a surprisingly gentle way of asking difficult questions. Unfortunately, Mrs. Wilson, your case isn't unusual, she told me during our second meeting. Financial exploitation by family members accounts for over 60% of elder abuse cases we see. I'm not elderly, I objected automatically. A hint of a smile crossed her face. In legal terms, elder abuse applies to victims over 60, regardless of their physical or mental condition. But I take your point. You're clearly vibrant and competent. She proceeded to walk me through the evidence they'd gathered. Copies of the fraudulent authorization letter with my forged signature, bank records showing the precise timing of the transfer, and most damning of all, text messages between Mark and Jessica discussing their plans. We need to move quickly, Mark had written 3 days before the transfer. Mom's retirement bonus gives us the perfect opportunity, but she's already talking about spending it on travel and art classes. Jessica's response had been equally revealing. Can we really pull this off? What if she fights it? She won't, Mark had replied. By the time she realizes what's happened, we'll have established a pattern of cognitive decline. Between my medical expertise and the documentation we've put together, no one will question it. Reading those words, the calculated plan to paint me as mentally incompetent, to steal not just my money but my autonomy and dignity, broke something fundamental in my relationship with my son. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a well-intentioned mistake. It was premeditated exploitation of the worst kind. We've interviewed Dr. Wilson, Detective Rivera continued. He's retained counsel and is declining to answer questions, which is his right. But we've also spoken with Diane Cooper, who cooperated fully and provided additional evidence corroborating your account. Did she? I was genuinely surprised. Yes. She seemed genuinely distressed by what had occurred and insisted she hadn't understood the full scope of what she was participating in. Her husband confirmed they're arranging to repay the $30,000 you provided for their home purchase as a gesture of good faith. A small part of me was relieved that Diane had chosen accountability, even if it had come after the fact. What happens next? I asked. The district attorney will review our findings and determine whether to file criminal charges. Based on the evidence we've gathered, I believe charges are likely. In the meantime, we'll continue building our case. I nodded, feeling simultaneously vindicated and heartbroken. Criminal charges against my own son. How had we reached this point? Mrs. Wilson, Detective Rivera said gently. "I've seen many victims in your situation withdraw their complaints once the initial shock wears off. Family pressure, guilt, fear of damaging relationships permanently. They're powerful motivators. But I want you to remember something. You did not cause this situation. You are not responsible for the choices your son made or the consequences he now faces." Her words stayed with me as I left the station, echoing in my mind as I drove home through the familiar streets of Cedar Springs. You are not responsible for the choices your son made. Yet a lifetime of maternal instinct argued otherwise. Wasn't I responsible for raising him, for shaping his character and values? Where had I gone wrong that my son could so coldly plot to steal from me? I was still wrestling with these questions when I arrived home to find a sleek black Mercedes parked in my driveway. Gregory Matthews, Jessica's father and Mark's father-in-law, stood on my porch, his imposing figure clad in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in my modest neighborhood. Gregory was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm in Lakewood, known for his aggressive litigation tactics and political connections. We'd met only a handful of times at family gatherings, where he'd always treated me with a kind of benign disinterest, the way one might regard a harmless but unremarkable piece of furniture. "Barbara," he greeted me as I approached, his voice smooth as polished marble. "I hope you don't mind my stopping by unannounced. I thought it was time we had a conversation." Every instinct warned me not to engage, but curiosity won out. "What could we possibly have to talk about, Gregory?" "Your misguided criminal complaint against my son-in-law, for starters." His smile never reached his eyes. "May I come in?" "This isn't a conversation we should have on your doorstep." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and led him into my living room. I didn't offer refreshments or invite him to sit, but he made himself comfortable on my sofa regardless, crossing one expensive loafer over his knee. "Barbara," he began with practiced reasonableness, "I understand you're upset about the financial arrangements Mark attempted to make on your behalf." Perhaps his approach was overzealous. But surely you can see that criminal charges are a disproportionate response to what is essentially a family misunderstanding. "A misunderstanding?" I repeated incredulously. "He stole my retirement savings after falsely claiming I was cognitively impaired. How exactly is that a misunderstanding?" Gregory waved a dismissive hand. "Legal terminology can be so inflammatory. Theft, fraud. These words suggest malicious intent, when in reality, Mark was simply trying to protect his mother's financial interests in a manner that, admittedly, lacked proper communication." I stared at him, momentarily speechless, at the audacity of his reframing. "Let's be pragmatic," he continued smoothly. "Criminal charges would be devastating for Mark. His medical career, his reputation, his future earning potential. By extension, it would harm Jessica and any grandchildren they might give you. Is that really what you want? To destroy your son's life over a financial dispute that can be resolved civilly?" "This isn't about what I want," I replied coldly. "It's about what Mark did. Actions have consequences, Gregory." His expression hardened slightly. "Indeed they do, and I feel obligated to make you aware of the potential consequences of continuing down this adversarial path." "Is that a threat?" "A reality check," he corrected. "Criminal cases are messy, public affairs. Details about your personal life, your financial history, even your mental state would all become matters of public record. Mark's defense would necessarily involve questioning your competence and decision-making, something I understand you're sensitive about." The implied threat was clear. Back off, or Mark's defense would destroy my reputation and dignity in the process of saving his own. "Furthermore," Gregory continued, leaning forward, "protracted legal battles are expensive. You've already lost access to your retirement savings, at least temporarily. Can you really afford to wage legal war against opponents with Substantially greater resources? I felt a chill at his calculated assessment of my vulnerability. Gregory wasn't just offering a settlement. He was threatening to use his considerable legal and financial power to crush me if I persisted in seeking justice. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. "A reasonable compromise. Mark returns your retirement funds with interest. You withdraw the criminal complaint and sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the entire unfortunate incident. Everyone moves forward with dignity intact. And I'm supposed to trust Mark with my money again after what he's done? To pretend this betrayal never happened?" Gregory smiled thinly. "Trust can be rebuilt, Barbara. But burnt bridges cannot always be reconstructed. Think carefully about whether justice, as you perceive it, is worth the permanent estrangement from your only son." I stood up, signaling that our conversation was over. "I appreciate your taking the time to visit, Gregory, but my decision stands. What Mark did was criminal, and I intend to see the legal process through to its conclusion." He remained seated, studying me with new interest. "You're more formidable than Mark led me to believe. He described you as emotionally vulnerable, easily manipulated. Clearly, he underestimated you." "Clearly," I agreed. Finally rising, Gregory straightened his expensive jacket. "My offer remains open, should you reconsider. But understand this. If you force this into the criminal arena, we will defend Mark with every resource at our disposal. The outcome may not be what you envision." "Thank you for the warning," I said, opening the front door. "I'll take my chances with the justice system." As his Mercedes pulled away, I realized my hands were shaking, not with fear, but with fury. The audacity of Gregory's visit, the cavalier way he'd attempted to minimize Mark's actions and intimidate me into silence, only strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about my money anymore. It was about standing up for myself against people who believed their wealth and connections placed them above accountability. I called Timothy immediately to report the encounter. "That's witness intimidation," he said grimly when I'd finished recounting Gregory's visit, "and potentially obstruction of justice. I'm calling Detective Rivera right now. Gregory Matthews may have just handed us additional ammunition." After hanging up, I sat in my quiet living room, contemplating how completely my life had changed in just 2 weeks. My retirement savings were in limbo, my relationship with my children shattered, and I was now embroiled in a criminal investigation with potentially far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. Yet beneath the pain and uncertainty, I felt something else stirring, a sense of clarity and purpose I hadn't experienced in years. For decades, I'd defined myself primarily as Mark and Diane's mother, measuring my success by their achievements and happiness. Now, forced to stand alone against their betrayal, I was rediscovering the woman I'd been before motherhood, resourceful, resilient, and unwilling to be anyone's victim. Whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms, not as a vulnerable elder to be protected or exploited, but as Barbara Wilson, a woman who had survived widowhood, raised 2 children alone, built a successful career, and now would fight for the retirement she'd earned through decades of sacrifice and hard work. Gregory Matthews and his legal threats didn't frighten me. After all, I'd already faced the worst betrayal imaginable. What could possibly be more painful than that? The Cedar Springs Gazette was delivered every Thursday morning, and I'd been reading it over coffee for so many years that the routine had become almost sacred. But this particular Thursday, the headline on page 3 made me choke on my first sip. Local physician accused of defrauding mother. The article was brief but devastating in its precision, outlining the allegations against Mark without naming him directly, though anyone in our close-knit community would have no trouble connecting the dots. A Cedar Springs doctor is under investigation for allegedly transferring over $300,000 from his mother's retirement account Without authorization. It read, "Sources close to the investigation indicate the physician may have misused his medical credentials to falsely claim his mother was experiencing cognitive decline." My phone began ringing almost immediately. First, Olivia Thompson, my closest friend since moving to Cedar Springs, then my neighbor Cynthia, followed by 3 other acquaintances, all expressing shock and offering support, but also fishing for details I wasn't prepared to share. By noon, I'd silenced my phone and was sitting in Frank and Patricia Reynolds' sunroom, seeking refuge from the sudden spotlight. Patricia poured me a second cup of tea, her kind face creased with concern. "The article doesn't mention you by name," she said, trying to be reassuring. "Most people won't make the connection." Frank, always more direct, shook his head. "In a town this size, everyone will know by dinner. But Barbara, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You're the victim here, not the perpetrator." "It doesn't feel that way," I admitted, staring into my teacup. "I feel exposed, humiliated, like everyone is judging my parenting, my relationship with my children, wondering what I did wrong to deserve this." "You did nothing wrong," Patricia said firmly. "Mark made his choices. So did Diane. You gave them values, education, love. What they did with those gifts is on them, not you." Frank leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped between his knees. "Barbara, I've known you for 15 years. You're one of the most dedicated, selfless mothers I've ever met. But you're also a person in your own right, with the same rights to dignity and security as anyone else. Don't let anyone, including your own children, make you forget that." His words, so similar to Detective Rivera's, steadied me. I took a deep breath and straightened my shoulders. "You're right. I need to stop hiding and face this head-on. What happened wasn't my fault, and I won't act as if it was." Patricia smiled, relief evident in her expression. "That's the Barbara we know. Now what can we do to help?" "Just what you're doing now," I replied gratefully. "Being friends, reminding me I'm not alone." When I returned home that afternoon, I found a certified letter from Meridian Partners in my mailbox. With trembling fingers, I opened it, scanning quickly for the relevant information. The firm acknowledged that the transfer from my retirement account had been improperly authorized and confirmed they had frozen the family trust account pending resolution of the dispute. They required additional documentation to reverse the transaction, but assured me they were cooperating fully with law enforcement. It wasn't an immediate victory, but it was progress. I called Timothy to share the update. "This is excellent news," he said, the satisfaction evident in his voice. "Once they verify the transfer was unauthorized, they'll be legally obligated to return the funds to avoid liability. I'll prepare the additional documentation they need immediately." "How long do you think it will take?" Hard to say with certainty. Financial institutions move at their own pace. But given the potential for criminal charges and civil liability if they delay, I'd estimate 2 to 3 weeks for the reversal to process. 2 to 3 weeks. After the emotional roller coaster of the past 10 days, it felt both impossibly long and surprisingly manageable. For the first time since discovering the theft, I allowed myself to believe that I might actually recover my retirement savings. "There's something else you should know," Timothy continued, his tone shifting. "The district attorney's office contacted me this morning. They're proceeding with charges against Mark." My breath caught. Despite knowing this was a possibility, even a likelihood, hearing it confirmed made it suddenly painfully real. "What exactly does that mean?" I asked. "It means Mark will be formally charged with financial elder abuse and fraud. There will be an arraignment, and eventually a trial if he doesn't accept a plea deal. Will I have to testify?" "Potentially, yes. But Barbara, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. Mark's defense team will almost certainly try to undermine your credibility and competence, just as Gregory Matthews implied. I thought of the threatening visit from Mark's father-in-law. his smooth voice delivering thinly veiled warnings about what would happen if I persisted. "I'm prepared for that," I said, though my voice betrayed more confidence than I truly felt. "There's also the issue of Diane's involvement," Timothy added carefully. "The DA is reviewing whether she should face charges as well, given her signature on the trust documents." My heart sank. Despite her betrayal, I didn't want to see Diane arrested or prosecuted. She had cooperated with the investigation and seemed genuinely remorseful. "Is there anything I can do to influence that decision?" "You can make a statement to the DA about your wishes regarding Diane, but ultimately, the decision to prosecute rests with them. If they believe they have sufficient evidence of knowing participation in the fraud, they may proceed regardless of your preferences." After hanging up, I sat on my back porch, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the branches of my old maple tree. The brilliant splash of red against green leaves reminded me of the stained glass window in the church where James and I had married, where we had baptized Mark and Diane, where I had sat alone at James's funeral, clutching my children's hands and wondering how I would manage without him. I had survived that devastating loss. I had built a life for myself and my children, had saved and sacrificed and planned for a future that was now in jeopardy. But I was still standing, still fighting, and for the first time in decades, fighting for myself rather than for someone else. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. "You're making a mistake that will destroy your family. Back off now before it's too late to fix this. Some secrets should stay buried." The threat was anonymous, but the implication was clear. Someone was trying to intimidate me into dropping the case. Gregory Matthews? Mark himself? Or someone else entirely? I saved the message and immediately forwarded it to Detective Rivera with a brief explanation. She called within minutes. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for reporting this. We take witness intimidation very seriously. Is it possible for you to come to the station so we can take a formal statement about both this text and Mr. Matthews' visit?" "Of course. I can be there in 30 minutes. "Perfect. And Mrs. Wilson, if you receive any additional threatening communications, please document them, but don't respond. We'll handle it from here." At the police station, Detective Rivera guided me through the process of documenting the threats. She seemed particularly interested in Gregory Matthews' visit. "The timing is suspicious," she observed as she reviewed my statement. "Within days of our interviewing his son-in-law, he shows up at your home with an offer to resolve the matter. Privately, coupled with thinly veiled threats about what might happen if you don't cooperate." "Do you think he sent the text message too?" "Possibly, though it's difficult to trace these things when people use temporary numbers or messaging apps. But the content certainly aligns with the pressure he was applying during his visit." She looked up from her notes, her expression serious. "Mrs. Wilson, would you be comfortable with us installing temporary security cameras at your home? Given these threats, we'd like to ensure your safety." The suggestion that I might be in physical danger hadn't occurred to me until that moment. "Do you really think that's necessary?" "It's a precaution. Financial crimes can escalate when the perpetrators feel cornered, especially when family dynamics and significant assets are involved. I'd rather be overly cautious than regret not taking steps to protect you." I agreed to the cameras, which were installed later that day. Small, unobtrusive devices at my front and back doors, and one overlooking my driveway. Detective Rivera also arranged for patrol cars to drive by my house at regular intervals, a gesture that was both reassuring and unsettling. Was I truly in danger from my own son or his father-in-law? That evening, as I was washing dishes after a solitary dinner, my doorbell rang. Peering through the peephole, I was surprised to see Paul Cooper, Diane's husband, shifting nervously on my front step, alone. I hesitated. Paul and I had never been particularly close. He'd always seemed more interested in leveraging his connection to me for financial assistance than in building a genuine relationship. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. "Paul, this is unexpected." He ran a hand through his thinning hair, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Wilson, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, but I need to talk to you. It's important." "Is Diane with you?" "No, she doesn't know I'm here. Can I come in, please?" Something in his demeanor, a nervous energy, almost desperate, made me relent. I unlatched the chain and stepped back, allowing him into the foyer but no further. "5 minutes," I said firmly. "And I should warn you that the police have installed security cameras around my property due to recent threats." Paul's eyes widened. "Threats? From who?" "That's what they're trying to determine. Now, what was so important that you came here without Diane?" He shifted his weight from foot to foot. "I wanted you to know that we've arranged to repay the $30,000 you gave us for the down payment. We've taken out a home equity line of credit. The money should be in your account by next week." "I appreciate that, Paul, but you could have told me this over the phone. There's more." He lowered his voice, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard despite us being alone in my house. "Mark didn't just target your retirement account. He had plans for your house, too." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" Paul looked miserable, torn between loyalty to his brother-in-law and whatever had driven him to my doorstep. "About 3 months ago, Mark approached me with a proposal. He said you were getting too old to maintain this house by yourself, that it would be better if you downsized to a condo or assisted living facility. He wanted me to help convince Diane that it was in your best interest." "And what was in it for you?" I asked coldly. He had the grace to look ashamed. "Mark suggested that if we helped persuade you to sell, we could use some of the proceeds to pay off our mortgage. He said you'd never need all the money from the sale for a smaller place, and this way your equity could stay in the family instead of being wasted on a luxury retirement you didn't need." I felt physically ill. Not only had Mark stolen my retirement savings, but he'd been plotting to take my home as well, the house I'd maintained for 30 years, where I'd raised my children, the most significant asset I owned besides my now compromised retirement accounts. "Why are you telling me this now, Paul?" He met my eyes directly for the first time since arriving. "Because Diane doesn't know about this part of the plan, and I don't want her implicated in something she had no knowledge of. She's already terrified about potentially facing charges for signing those trust documents without understanding what they meant." "Does Mark know you're here?" "God, no. He'd never speak to me again if he knew I was warning you." Paul ran a hand through his hair again, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. "Look, Mrs. Wilson, I'm not pretending to be a hero here. I went along with Mark's plans further than I should have because the financial incentives were tempting. But when I saw how devastated Diane was about what happened with your retirement account, how betrayed she felt by Mark and by her own unwitting participation, I realized I needed to come clean." I studied him carefully, weighing his words against his past behavior. Paul had always struck me as weak-willed and somewhat opportunistic, but not malicious. His current distress seemed genuine, as did his concern for Diane. "I'll tell Detective Rivera what you've shared," I said finally. "Whether it helps Diane's case will be up to the district attorney." "I understand." He fumbled in his jacket pocket and extracted a folded sheet of paper. "I brought this too. It's an email from Mark outlining the house scheme. I printed it out for you. I thought it might help your case." I took the paper without unfolding it, tucking it into my pocket. "Thank you for coming forward, Paul. It couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," he admitted. "But it was the right thing to do." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry for my part in all this. You deserved better from us, from all of us." After Paul left, I sat at my kitchen table and carefully unfolded the email he had given me. It was indeed from Mark, dated just over 3 months earlier, with the subject line, Mom's housing situation. The message outlined in clinical detail a plan to convince me to sell my house, using a combination of concern about maintenance costs, exaggerated safety risks for a woman living alone, and appeals to my desire not to be a burden as I aged. The most chilling part was the detailed breakdown of how the proceeds from the sale would be distributed. 30% to fund a modest senior apartment, 30% to be added to the family trust for safekeeping, and the remaining 40% to be invested in family priorities, including helping Mark and Jessica purchase a larger home and paying off Diane and Paul's mortgage. Nowhere in the email was there any consideration of what I might want or need, or any acknowledgement that the house and its equity belonged solely to me. I was treated as an obstacle to be managed, not a person with agency or rights to my own property. I forwarded the email to Timothy and Detective Rivera, my hands shaking with a combination of fury and vindication. This was irrefutable evidence of a broader conspiracy to systematically strip me of my assets under the guise of protecting me. Detective Rivera called early the next morning. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for sending this email. It significantly strengthens our case against Dr. Wilson and potentially implicates others in a conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse." "Including Paul?" I asked, surprisingly reluctant to see him prosecuted after he had come forward voluntarily. "That's for the DA to determine, but his cooperation will certainly be taken into consideration. The fact that he voluntarily provided evidence against Dr. Wilson and disclosed the broader scheme will likely work in his favor." I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The evidence against Mark was mounting, making it increasingly likely he would face serious consequences for his actions. Yet the thought of my son, regardless of what he had done, facing criminal charges and potentially prison time, still sent a spike of maternal anguish through my heart. "Detective?" I said, hesitantly. "What kind of penalties might Mark be facing if he's convicted?" There was a brief pause before she answered, her tone careful and professional. "Financial elder abuse involving amounts over $100,000 is a felony that can carry prison time of up to 4 years, plus restitution and fines. Given Dr. Wilson's position of trust as both your son and a physician, and the evidence of premeditation and conspiracy, the DA would likely seek a significant sentence, 4 years. Mark could spend 4 years in prison for what he had done." The thought was almost unbearable, despite my anger and sense of betrayal. Is there any way to resolve this without a trial?" I asked. "Some kind of plea, arrangement that would include full restitution, but perhaps avoid prison time?" "That would be up to the district attorney's office," Detective Rivera replied. "But, Mrs. Wilson, I need to ask, are you having second thoughts about pursuing charges?" I closed my eyes, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions. "No," I said finally. "What Mark did was wrong, and there need to be consequences. I suppose I'm still struggling with the reality of seeing my son prosecuted as a criminal." "That's completely normal," she assured me. "Many victims of family financial abuse experience similar conflicted feelings. It might help to remember that the criminal justice system isn't just about punishment. It's also about accountability and preventing further harm to others." After we hung up, I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the morning light filter through the maple leaves. Detective Rivera's words echoed in my mind: accountability and preventing further harm. If Mark faced no serious consequences for stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from his own mother, what message would that send? That family members were fair game for financial exploitation? That the wealthy and well-connected could commit crimes with impunity? My phone rang again. Timothy this time with unexpected news. "Barbara, Meridian Partners called. They've completed their investigation and determined that the transfer was indeed unauthorized. They're preparing to reverse the transaction and return your funds to your original retirement account. Relief washed over me. When? The paperwork is being processed now. They estimate the funds will be back in your account within 5-7 business days. You'll need to sign some documents releasing them from liability, which I've already reviewed and approved. That's wonderful news. For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. My retirement savings, the security I'd worked so hard to build, would soon be back under my control. There's more, Timothy continued. Mark's attorney reached out this morning. They want to discuss a settlement. My pulse quickened. What kind of settlement? The details weren't specified, but the timing suggests they've learned about Meridian, Partner's decision to return the funds, and Paul Cooper's cooperation with the investigation. They're likely looking for a way to mitigate the criminal charges. Do you think I should consider it? Timothy was silent for a moment, weighing his words carefully. As your attorney, I should point out that a settlement might offer you more immediate closure and certainty than a lengthy criminal trial. However, as your friend, I'll remind you that you weren't looking for a financial windfall here. You were seeking justice for a serious betrayal of trust. The question is, what would justice look like to you at this point? It was a profound question, one I wasn't prepared to answer immediately. Can I think about it? Of course. I'll set up a meeting with Mark's attorney later this week, and you can decide your position before then. There's no obligation to agree to anything. After hanging up, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. Cedar Springs was at its most beautiful in late spring, with flowering dogwoods and azaleas painting the carefully maintained yards in shades of pink and white. I'd walked these streets thousands of times over the decades, pushing a stroller when the children were small, holding their hands as they learned to ride bikes, later alone after they left for college and started their own lives. This community had witnessed every chapter of my adult life, the triumphs and tragedies, the everyday moments that had shaped our family story. Now it was witnessing this painful unraveling, this public exposure of betrayal and broken trust. Lost in thought, I almost didn't notice Eleanor Matthews, Jessica's mother and Gregory's wife, until we were face to face on the sidewalk. She was dressed for tennis, her blonde hair pulled back in a youthful ponytail that contrasted with the tight, disapproving line of her mouth. "Barbara," she greeted me coldly. "I'm surprised to see you out and about given the circumstances." I straightened my shoulders. "Hello, Eleanor. Beautiful day, isn't it?" She ignored my attempt at pleasantry. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to our family? To Jessica? To your own son's reputation and career?" "I think the question is what Mark did to his own reputation and career when he decided to steal my retirement savings," I replied evenly. Eleanor's perfectly made-up face contorted with indignation. "He was trying to protect you. Your financial management has been questionable for years. Everyone knows you've been supporting both your children well beyond what's reasonable. Mark was simply taking steps to secure your future before you gave away everything to Diane or some charity scam." The casual disdain in her voice, the assumption that I was incapable of managing my own affairs, ignited a slow-burning anger in me. "Do you actually believe that, Eleanor? Or is that just the story Mark and Jessica have been telling to justify theft?" "It wasn't theft," she hissed, glancing around to make sure no neighbors were witnessing our confrontation. "It was prudent financial management by someone who actually understands how money works. Your son is a respected physician, not a criminal. And yet he forged my signature, lied about my mental capacity, and transferred my money without my knowledge or consent. What would you call that, if not criminal?" Eleanor's face flushed with anger. "I would call it a family matter that should have been handled privately, not dragged through the courts and plastered across the local newspaper. Do you have any idea how humiliating this has been for Jessica? For our entire family? I can. Imagine, I said quietly. It must be somewhat similar to discovering your own child has stolen your life savings and tried to have you declared incompetent. She took a physical step back, as if my words had physically struck her. You're making a terrible mistake, Barbara. Gregory warned you there would be consequences if you pursued this vindictive crusade. The Matthews family has resources and connections you can't begin to imagine. When this is over, you'll be the one who ends up alone and disgraced. The threat was unmistakable, but instead of intimidating me, it only strengthened my resolve. Is that another attempt at witness? Intimidation, Eleanor? Because the last one was reported to the police, and I'll be reporting this one too. Her eyes widened in alarm. Don't be ridiculous. I'm simply stating facts. So am I. Goodbye, Eleanor. I walked away with my head held high, leaving her standing on the sidewalk. Her threats, like Gregory's, revealed the true nature of the family my son had married into. Wealthy, entitled people who believed their status placed them above the law and common decency. Back home, I found a voicemail from Diane. Mom, it's me. I heard that Meridian Partners is returning your money. I'm so relieved. Paul told me he went to see you about everything. I want you to know I had no idea about the house scheme. None. I never would have agreed to that. Please call me when you can. I miss you. Her voice sounded small and sincere, cracking slightly on the final words. Despite everything, a part of me ached to comfort her, to assure her that our relationship wasn't beyond repair. But another part, the part that had been strengthening daily since the betrayal, knew that reconciliation would require time, accountability, and fundamental changes in how she viewed me and her responsibilities as an adult daughter. I decided not to call her back immediately. Instead, I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and began to write out what justice in this situation would look like to me. Timothy's question deserved careful consideration before our meeting with Mark's attorney. After nearly an hour of reflection, I had my answer. A framework for what I would need to consider any kind of settlement. Full financial restitution was only the beginning. I also wanted formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, not just from Mark, but from everyone who had participated in or benefited from the scheme. I wanted protection from future attempts to control my assets or question my competence. And I wanted assurances that Diane, who seemed genuinely remorseful, would not face criminal charges as a result of her limited, unknowing participation. Most importantly, I wanted to reclaim my power, to establish unequivocally that I was not a vulnerable elder to be managed, controlled, or exploited, but a competent adult with the right to make my own decisions about my life and resources. Armed with this clarity, I called Timothy to discuss the upcoming meeting with Mark's attorney. For the first time since discovering the theft, I felt fully in control. Not of the outcome, which remained uncertain, but of my own position and priorities within this painful family drama. The Barbara Wilson who had trusted blindly, who had given endlessly without expectation of respect or reciprocity, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and unwilling to accept anything less than the justice and dignity she deserved. The law offices of Bradshaw and Harrington occupied the entire top floor of the tallest building in Lakewood, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city skyline and distant mountains. I sat beside Timothy in a conference room larger than my entire living room, an untouched glass of water in front of me, waiting for Mark's attorneys to arrive. Remember, Timothy said quietly, you're in a position of strength here. They requested this meeting, not us. Mark is facing serious criminal charges with substantial evidence against him. Whatever they offer, we can walk away if it doesn't meet your requirements. I nodded, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from my charcoal gray suit, the one I'd worn to Frank's retirement party, now repurposed for this pivotal confrontation. The irony wasn't lost on me. What should have been the beginning of my carefree retirement had instead become a battle for my financial autonomy and dignity. The door opened, and 3 people entered. A silver-haired man in an immaculate suit who introduced himself as Edward Bradshaw, Mark's lead attorney. A younger woman with sharp eyes and a tablet in hand, identified as his associate Vanessa Chen. And to my surprise, Mark himself. My son looked terrible. Gaunt, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. For a moment, maternal instinct threatened to override my resolve. This was my child, the little boy who'd once crawled into my lap for comfort after skinning his knee, now sitting across from me as an adversary in a legal proceeding. But then I remembered his calculated betrayal, the text messages plotting to steal my savings, the email outlining plans to take my home. The wave of sympathy receded, replaced by steady determination. Edward Bradshaw smiled with practiced charm. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for agreeing to meet with us today. We believe there's a path forward that could serve everyone's interests without the need for protracted legal proceedings." "I'm listening," I replied neutrally. Bradshaw slid a document across the polished table. "We're prepared to offer full restitution of the transferred retirement funds, with interest, plus an additional $50,000 for any inconvenience or distress you've experienced. In exchange, we'd ask you to request that the district attorney's office drop all criminal charges." Timothy picked up the document, scanning it quickly while I kept my gaze steady on Mark, who couldn't seem to meet my eyes. "This offer is inadequate," Timothy said flatly, setting the paper down without passing it to me. "It addresses only the financial aspect of the harm done to my client while completely ignoring the broader issues of trust violation, attempted financial control, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." Vanessa Chen leaned forward. "Mrs. Wilson has already been informed that her retirement funds are being returned by Meridian Partners. This offer provides substantial additional compensation for what was essentially a misunderstanding about asset management." "A misunderstanding?" I echoed, unable to contain my disbelief. "My son forged my signature, falsely claimed I was cognitively impaired, and transferred my life savings without my knowledge or consent. That's not a misunderstanding. It's fraud." Mark finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Mom, I was trying to protect you. Your spending patterns had changed. You were talking about withdrawing large sums for travel and frivolous expenses. Art classes at the community center and a trip to visit my college roommate are hardly frivolous expenses," I interrupted. "And even if they were, they're my expenses to make. My money, my choice." "You weren't thinking clearly," Mark insisted, a flash of the old self-righteousness breaking through his chastened facade. "Jessica and I were worried you'd deplete your savings before—" "Before what?" I challenged. "Before you could get your hands on it?" Bradshaw intervened smoothly. "Perhaps we could all take a step back. Dr. Wilson's intentions, however misguided, in execution, came from a place of genuine concern for his mother's financial security." "Concern," Timothy replied dryly, "doesn't typically involve forging signatures and falsifying medical evaluations. But let's set intentions aside and focus on resolution. My client has considered what would constitute an acceptable settlement, and it goes beyond mere financial restitution." He outlined the conditions I had formulated the day before: full financial restitution, including legal fees, formal written acknowledgement of wrongdoing from all parties involved, legally binding agreements preventing any future attempts to control my assets or question my competence, and assurances that Diane would not face criminal charges for her limited role. Bradshaw and Chen exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by the comprehensive demands. Mark's face had gone pale. "These terms are extensive," Bradshaw said carefully. "The financial component is relatively straightforward, but a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing could potentially expose Dr. Wilson to civil liability beyond this case. And we have no control over the district attorney's decisions regarding Mrs. Cooper." "Those are my conditions," I said firmly. I'm not interested in punitive financial damages beyond what was taken from me and the costs I've incurred. But I will not agree to any settlement that doesn't include explicit acknowledgement of what was done and protection against future attempts to control my life or finances. Mark leaned forward, a hint of desperation in his voice. Mom, please, you have to understand. My entire career, everything I've worked for is at stake here. If I'm convicted of a felony, I'll lose my medical license. I could go to prison. You should have considered those potential consequences before you stole my retirement savings, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Actions have consequences, Mark. That's something I taught you long ago. Maybe we could modify the acknowledgement language, Vanessa suggested, tapping rapidly on her tablet. A statement that recognizes the transfer was unauthorized without specifically admitting to criminal intent. Timothy shook his head. That won't suffice. My client isn't interested in semantic games or half measures. Either Dr. Wilson and the others involved acknowledge exactly what they did, including the conspiracy to take control of Mrs. Wilson's house, or we proceed with the criminal case. The house? Bradshaw asked sharply, looking at Mark. What is he talking about? Mark's face drained of color. It wasn't like that. It was just a conversation, a theoretical plan to help Mom downsize to something more manageable as she aged. We have the email, Mark, I said quietly. The one you sent to Paul detailing exactly how you plan to pressure me into selling my home and how the proceeds would be distributed, primarily to benefit you, Jessica, Diane, and Paul, with only a small portion allocated for my modest senior apartment. Bradshaw turned to Mark, professional composure momentarily slipping. You didn't mention any emails about a house scheme. What else haven't you disclosed to us? Mark's silence was damning. I think we need a brief recess, Bradshaw said, standing abruptly. Dr. Wilson, Ms. Chen and I need to confer privately. They left the conference room, Mark following with slumped shoulders and a backward glance that held equal parts resentment and plea for understanding. Once the door closed behind them, I released a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. You did extremely well, Timothy said, offering a reassuring smile. Especially when Mark tried to justify his actions. It's harder than I expected, I admitted. Seeing him like this. Part of me still wants to protect him, even after everything he's done. That's because you're a good mother, Barbara. But protecting him now wouldn't be doing him any favors. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is allow people to face the consequences of their choices. We sat in companionable silence for nearly 20 minutes before the door opened again. Only Bradshaw and Chen returned. Mark was noticeably absent. After consulting with our client, Bradshaw began, resuming his seat, we're prepared to accept most of your terms with some modifications. Dr. Wilson will provide full financial restitution, including your legal fees, plus the $50,000 additional compensation previously offered. He will sign a formal acknowledgement of unauthorized fund transfer and improper use of his medical credentials, though we request neutral language that doesn't explicitly admit to criminal intent. And the house scheme? Timothy pressed. Chen stepped in. Dr. Wilson acknowledges discussing the potential sale of Mrs. Wilson's home with family members, but maintains it was conceptual only and never acted upon. He's willing to include this in the formal acknowledgement. What about the other participants? I asked. Jessica was clearly involved, as were Paul and possibly Diane. Gregory and Eleanor Matthews have both attempted to intimidate me into dropping the case. I want acknowledgements from all of them. Bradshaw's expression tightened. We represent Dr. Wilson, not his extended family. We can't compel others to sign acknowledgements. Then our terms aren't met, Timothy said simply, gathering his papers as if preparing to leave. Barbara was very clear about her requirements. Wait. Bradshaw held up a hand. Perhaps we could approach this differently. Dr. Wilson could Provide affidavits detailing the involvement of others in exchange for your agreement not to pursue civil claims against them. That would give you the documentation you need without requiring their direct participation in this settlement. Timothy and I exchanged glances. That might be acceptable, he said cautiously, provided the affidavits are comprehensive and truthful. As for Mrs. Cooper, Chen added, Dr. Wilson is willing to provide a statement to the district attorney confirming she was not aware of the full scope or implications of the documents she signed, which should help mitigate any potential charges against her. We spent the next hour negotiating specific terms and language, with Bradshaw and Chen periodically leaving to consult with Mark. By the end, we had hammered out a provisional agreement that met most of my requirements. Full financial restitution, plus compensation for emotional distress and legal fees, a detailed acknowledgement from Mark about both the retirement fund theft and the house scheme, affidavits regarding others' involvement, legally binding guarantees against future attempts to control my finances, and statements supporting leniency for Diane. We'll draft the formal agreement and have it to you by tomorrow afternoon, Bradshaw said as we concluded. Assuming it meets with your approval, we'll submit it to the district attorney's office along with Dr. Wilson's statement accepting responsibility. And if the DA decides to pursue charges anyway? I asked. That's a distinct possibility, Bradshaw acknowledged. Financial elder abuse is taken very seriously, particularly when it involves abuse of professional credentials. However, your support for leniency and Dr. Wilson's acceptance of responsibility would likely influence the outcome significantly. As Timothy and I gathered our belongings to leave, I asked, May I speak with Mark privately before we go? Both attorneys looked startled, but Bradshaw nodded. I'll see if he's available, though I should advise against any discussions about the case details outside our presence. It's not about the case, I assured him. It's personal. 5 minutes. Later, Mark entered the conference room alone, closing the door behind him. He looked even more haggard up close, his physician's confident bearing replaced by the slumped posture of a man facing the collapse of his carefully constructed life. Mom, he began, his voice rough. I don't know what to say. I've made a terrible mistake. Yes, you have, I agreed, not unkindly. What I want to understand is why. Not the justifications you've been offering. The real reason. When did you start seeing me as an obstacle to be managed, rather than a person deserving of respect? Mark sank into a chair, running his hands through his disheveled hair. It wasn't one moment. It was gradual. Jessica's family has always had money, connections. The Matthews name opens doors in this town that I couldn't access on my own merits. But there was always this undercurrent of judgment. Comments about my humble beginnings, questions about why you were still working at your age when Eleanor had been supported by Gregory for decades. So this was about impressing your in-laws? The thought was both painful and infuriating. Not entirely, but partly, yes. Mark couldn't meet my eyes. Gregory started investing heavily in my new practice. Eleanor introduced Jessica to her social circle, clients who could afford the highest-tier cosmetic procedures. We were finally getting established at their level. And then I received a substantial retirement bonus and started talking about art classes and travel instead of continuing to work and help support your lifestyle. I finished for him. He flinched. That sounds terrible when you put it that way. Because it is terrible, Mark. You plotted to steal my retirement savings and pressure me out of my home because you were embarrassed by my middle-class lifestyle and wanted my money to elevate your social standing with the Matthews family. It wasn't just that, he protested weakly. The market has been unstable. Inflation is rising. I genuinely believed pooling our resources under professional management was the safest approach. With you in control, I pointed out. Not me. He had no response to that. Mark, I've spent my entire adult life putting you and Diane first. I worked multiple jobs to give you opportunities, helped pay for your education, supported you through your residency. When did that translate into ownership? When did my sacrifices for you become an entitlement to everything I've worked for? Tears welled in his eyes. I don't know. I don't recognize myself anymore, Mom. The person who did these things. That's not who I wanted to be. But it is who you became, I said gently. And now you have to decide who you want to be. Going forward, the settlement we've negotiated gives you a chance to make amends, to acknowledge your wrongdoing without necessarily destroying your entire future. What you do with that chance is up to you. What about us? He asked, his voice barely audible. Can we ever fix this? I considered the question carefully, unwilling to offer false hope or premature forgiveness. Trust, once broken, is very difficult to rebuild. I don't know if our relationship can ever be what it was before. But I do know this. Real reconciliation can only begin with complete honesty and genuine accountability. Not excuses, not justifications. Full acceptance of what you did and why you did it. Mark nodded slowly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I've never seen you like this before. So, formidable. I've always been formidable, Mark. You just never noticed because my strength was directed toward supporting you rather than opposing you. I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. Think carefully about the statement. You're going to provide. Make it honest. Make it complete. That's the only path forward from here. He rose as well, hesitating as if wanting to embrace me, but sensing it would be unwelcome. I'm sorry, Mom. Truly. I believe you're sorry. You got caught. I replied honestly. Whether you're sorry for the actual betrayal remains to be seen. As I left the building with Timothy, the bright mid-afternoon sun seemed symbolic, illuminating a path forward that, while difficult and not entirely what I had envisioned for my retirement years, at least offered clarity and the promise of resolution. What do you think will happen to Mark? I asked Timothy as we drove back toward Cedar Springs. Professionally, I mean. That depends largely on how the medical board views his actions, Timothy replied, keeping his eyes on the road. Using his medical credentials to falsely claim, "You were cognitively impaired" is a serious ethics violation. Even without criminal charges, he could face suspension or revocation of his license. However, a first offense with demonstrated remorse and no patient harm might result in a less severe outcome: probation, mandatory ethics courses, community service. I nodded, absorbing this information. Part of me, the wounded mother part, felt a grim satisfaction at the thought of Mark facing professional consequences for his betrayal. But another part still ached at the thought of his career being irreparably damaged. You don't have to decide how you feel about all this right now, Timothy said gently, seeming to read my thoughts. Coming to terms with what happened and finding your own path to healing will take time. I know, I agreed. But at least the financial aspect is being resolved. That's something. The following days passed in a blur of legal documents, phone calls, and cautious optimism. True to their word, Mark's attorneys delivered a comprehensive settlement agreement that met all our negotiated terms. Mark's formal acknowledgement was more forthright than I had expected, admitting clearly to unauthorized transfer of my retirement funds, falsification of documents, and improper use of his medical credentials to misrepresent my cognitive status. He also confirmed the existence of the house scheme, though he characterized it as preliminary discussions that never progressed to action. Most surprisingly, Jessica had provided her own statement acknowledging her role in the conspiracy, admitting she had encouraged Mark's actions and participated in discussions about accessing my retirement funds without my knowledge. Her statement seemed less motivated by genuine remorse than by strategic damage control, but it was still valuable documentation of what had occurred. Paul's affidavit corroborated the details of the house scheme and confirmed that he had initially participated in discussions about convincing me to sell my home, but had later become uncomfortable with the plan's direction. Diane's statement verified she had signed trust documents without fully understanding their implications and had never been informed about the plan to pressure me into selling my house. Timothy submitted the complete package to the district attorney's office, along with a letter from me supporting leniency for Diane and acknowledging Mark's acceptance of responsibility without explicitly requesting charges be dropped. "The ball is in their court now," Timothy explained when I called for an update. "Given the comprehensive nature of the settlement agreement and the fact that you'll be receiving full restitution, they may decide not to proceed with criminal charges against Mark. But they might also view the case as an opportunity to send a message about elder financial abuse. And if they do proceed, then Mark would likely be offered a plea deal, possibly involving probation, community service, and restitution rather than incarceration, especially since this is a first offense and he's demonstrated willingness to make amends." I thanked Timothy for the update and hung up, feeling strangely hollow despite the apparent progress. The settlement agreement provided everything I had asked for in concrete terms: financial restitution, acknowledgement of wrongdoing, protection against future exploitation. Yet it couldn't restore what had been irrevocably damaged: my trust in my children, my sense of family security, the retirement I had carefully planned and looked forward to. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Samantha Chen, the branch manager from Lakewood Credit Union who had initially processed the fraudulent transfer of my retirement funds, stood on my doorstep looking nervous but determined. "Mrs. Wilson," she began formally, "I owe you an apology. I should have done more to verify the authorization for the transfer of your retirement funds, especially given the large amount involved. While we followed standard protocols, your case has made us realize those protocols are inadequate for protecting our members from potential financial abuse." Her candor surprised me. "Thank you for saying that, Ms. Chen. I appreciate your taking personal responsibility." "It's more than just an apology," she continued, handing me an envelope. "The credit union has implemented new security measures for large transfers from retirement accounts, including direct verbal confirmation from the account holder regardless of submitted documentation. We're calling it the Wilson Protocol, and it will help protect other members from experiencing what happened to you." I was momentarily speechless. The thought that my ordeal might help prevent similar exploitation of others was unexpectedly moving. "Additionally," Samantha continued, "the credit union would like to offer compensation for our role in facilitating the unauthorized transfer. It's not an admission of legal liability, but rather an acknowledgement that we could have done better by a valued long-term member." The envelope contained a formal letter of apology from the credit union's president and a check for $25,000. While I appreciated the gesture, what meant more was the institutional acknowledgement of how financial systems could be manipulated to exploit older adults, even those who were perfectly competent to manage their own affairs. "We'd also like to invite you to participate in an educational panel we're organizing about preventing financial elder abuse," Samantha added. "Your perspective could be invaluable to both our staff and members." I was touched by the request. The idea of transforming my painful experience into something that might help others was appealing. "I'd be happy to consider that," I told her sincerely. After Samantha left, I sat on my front porch swing, contemplating how much had changed in just a few weeks. My relationship with my children was fractured, possibly beyond repair. I'd been forced to confront painful truths about how they viewed me and my place in their lives. Yet I'd also discovered reserves of strength and resilience I hadn't fully recognized in myself, and found unexpected support from friends, professionals, and even institutions like the credit union. My phone buzzed with a text message from Frank Reynolds. "Just heard from Timothy. Congratulations on the settlement agreement. Patricia and I are taking you to dinner tomorrow to celebrate. No arguing, We've already made reservations at Riverside Grill for 7 p.m. I smiled at his characteristic blend of support and gentle bossiness. Frank and Patricia had been steadfast allies throughout this ordeal, offering practical help and emotional support without judgment. Their friendship had become one of the unexpected bright spots in an otherwise dark chapter of my life. As dusk settled over Cedar Springs, I found myself contemplating what my retirement might look like now. The financial security I'd worked so hard to build was being restored, but the family relationships I'd assumed would be the cornerstone of my later years were irrevocably altered. What would fill that space? What new purposes and connections might emerge from this painful transition? My phone rang again. The district attorney's office. With a deep breath, I answered, ready to hear whether Mark would face criminal charges, despite our settlement agreement. Mrs. Wilson, this is Assistant District Attorney Keller. I'm calling regarding the case against your son, Dr. Mark Wilson. Yes, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Has a decision been made? After reviewing the settlement agreement and your statement, we've decided to offer Dr. Wilson a deferred prosecution agreement. Essentially, criminal charges will be filed but not immediately pursued, provided he complies with certain conditions for a period of 2 years. What kind of conditions? I asked, both relieved and apprehensive. Full restitution as outlined in your settlement agreement, 200 hours of community service in elder care facilities, completion of an ethics course approved by the medical board, and regular check-ins with a court-appointed monitor. If he successfully fulfills all conditions and commits no additional offenses during the 2-year period, the charges will be dismissed. I closed my eyes, absorbing the information. Not an outright dismissal of charges, but not a traditional prosecution either. A middle path that acknowledged the seriousness of Mark's actions while offering a chance for rehabilitation rather than pure punishment. The agreement also specifies that Dr. Wilson must self-report to the state medical board, Ada Keller continued. They'll conduct their own investigation and determine any professional consequences independently from our criminal process. I understand, I said. And Diane? Based on the evidence provided, including Dr. Wilson's statement and your own assessment, we've decided not to pursue charges against Mrs. Cooper. The evidence suggests she was not fully aware of the nature or implications of the document she signed. After thanking him for the update, I hung up and sat watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The district attorney's decision seemed fair, holding Mark accountable without completely destroying his future, sparing Diane from charges she likely didn't deserve, ensuring I would receive full restitution while setting conditions that might help prevent similar behavior in the future. Whether it constituted justice in the fullest sense, I couldn't say. The wounds inflicted by my children's betrayal were still raw, the trust broken perhaps beyond repair, but at least there was resolution, a path forward that didn't require me to either abandon my self-respect or destroy my son's life completely. As I finally rose to go inside, I noticed a car pulling slowly into my driveway, Diane's modest blue sedan. She emerged alone, clutching what appeared to be a small gift bag, her face apprehensive as she approached the porch. "Mom?" she called softly. "Do you have a minute to talk?" I hesitated, weighing my emotional readiness for this conversation against the tentative hope in my daughter's voice. After everything that had happened, I wasn't certain I could trust her motives or sincerity. Yet, something, perhaps maternal instinct, perhaps simply human compassion, prompted me to nod and gesture toward the porch swing beside me. "I heard from the district attorney," she began, settling nervously beside me. "They're not pressing charges against me. I know that's because of you, because you told them I wasn't fully involved. Thank you for that." "You're welcome," I replied, my tone neutral. "I didn't want to see you prosecuted for something you didn't fully understand or intend." Diane nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I brought you something." She handed me the gift bag. It's not much, just a start. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000 and a handwritten note. First installment on repaying the $30,000 down payment loan. We'll send $2,500 monthly until fully repaid. With love and deepest apologies, Diane. Paul and I took out a home equity line of credit, she explained. We're selling one of our cars, too. We can't repay it all at once, but we'll get there. I promise. The gesture touched me, not because I needed the money, which would soon be insignificant compared to my restored retirement account, but because it represented tangible acknowledgement of obligation and the beginning of accountability. I appreciate that, Diane. It means a lot. She twisted her hands in her lap. Mom, I know saying sorry isn't enough. What happened? What Mark did? What I allowed to happen by not asking more questions? It's unforgivable. Perhaps not unforgivable, I said carefully, but not easily forgiven either. Trust takes years to build and moments to break. Rebuilding it, if that's even possible, will take time and consistent effort. I understand, she whispered. I just want you to know that I'm committed to trying, if you'll let me. Not just repaying the money, but earning back your trust, being the daughter you deserve. I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity, and finding only genuine remorse and hope. Of my two children, Diane had always been the more emotionally intuitive, the one who could recognize her mistakes and grow from them. Perhaps there was a foundation here that could be salvaged, even if the relationship would never be quite the same. We can start with small steps, I said finally. Regular phone calls, occasional dinners perhaps. But Diane, I need you to understand something important. My life and my decisions are my own. I won't tolerate any further attempts to control me or my resources, no matter how well-intentioned. Absolutely, she agreed quickly. I've learned that lesson in the hardest possible way. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching fireflies begin to dance in the gathering darkness. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too profound for that. But it was a beginning, a tentative step toward whatever new relationship might emerge from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Would you like to come inside for a cup of tea? I offered, surprising myself. Diane's smile was cautious, but genuine. I'd like that very much. As we rose to enter the house, my house, secure and fully mine despite Mark's abandoned scheme, I felt a curious sense of lightness. The path ahead remained uncertain, relationships forever altered, trust tentatively rebuilding one small gesture at a time. But I had reclaimed something essential in the process, my autonomy, my dignity, and a newfound confidence in my ability to stand firm against those who would undermine either. Whatever shape my retirement ultimately took, it would be on my terms, not anyone else's. And perhaps that hard-won freedom was worth more than all the betrayals it had cost to achieve. 1 year later, I stood in the doorway of my new art studio, watching morning light stream through the east-facing windows and illuminate the canvas on my easel. The painting, a landscape of the mountain view from my back deck, was still in its early stages, blues and purples blending to capture the fjord. Misty dawn I'd been waking up to every morning since moving to Lake Haven. My retirement had taken a different shape than I'd originally planned. Instead of staying in the Cedar Springs house where I'd raised my family, I'd sold it last fall and purchased a charming cottage in a small lakeside community 30 miles away. The decision hadn't been solely about escaping painful memories. It was about claiming a fresh start, creating a space that was entirely mine, shaped by my preferences rather than practical considerations for raising children. The cottage had 3 bedrooms, one for me, one converted into this light-filled art studio, and one for guests, though I was selective about who received invitations. My retirement fund, fully restored plus interest, had weathered the market, fluctuations well under Kevin Morris's steady management. The additional compensation from Mark and the credit union had been invested in renovating the cottage and purchasing quality art supplies, things I would once have considered extravagant, but now recognized as investments in my well-being. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Community Center. Financial Literacy for Seniors, 10 a.m. I smiled, gathering my notes for the presentation I would be giving as part of a panel on preventing financial exploitation. What had begun with Samantha Chen's invitation to speak at the credit union had evolved into regular presentations at community centers, retirement homes, and even a local college's adult education program. My painful experience had been transformed into a mission to help others protect themselves. The most important thing to remember, I would tell my audiences, is that being older doesn't make you less capable of managing your own affairs. Financial exploitation thrives on the assumption that seniors are vulnerable, confused, or too trusting. Your age doesn't diminish your right to control your own resources or make your own decisions. The presentations weren't just about warning signs and prevention strategies. They were about empowerment, about refusing to be sidelined or controlled as we aged. The response had been overwhelming. So many older adults shared similar experiences of children, relatives, or caretakers who had attempted to take control under the guise of helping. My relationship with Mark remained distant but civil. He had completed the first year of his deferred prosecution agreement without incident, fulfilling his community service hours at a local elder care facility and attending the required ethics courses. The medical board had placed him on probation for 2 years, but allowed him to continue practicing under supervision. Jessica had filed for divorce 6 months after the settlement, unable to accept the damage to their social standing and financial prospects. Mark had moved to a smaller apartment and started over, humbled but perhaps ultimately healthier for the experience. Diane and I had cautiously rebuilt a relationship, beginning with those cups of tea on my porch and progressing to regular Sunday dinners. She had kept her promise to repay the down payment loan, sending monthly checks without fail, even when it meant significant sacrifices for her and Paul. More importantly, she had respected my boundaries, never questioning my decisions about my money or my life, even when I announced my plans to sell the Cedar Springs house and move to Lake Haven. "It's your life, Mom," she had said simply. "I just want to be part of it again, on whatever terms you're comfortable with." Frank and Patricia Reynolds had remained steadfast friends, visiting my new home frequently and including me in their social circle at Lake Haven, where they had a vacation cabin. Frank had introduced me to the local art community, encouraging me to take classes and eventually show my work at a small gallery in town. Patricia had drawn me into her book club and volunteer activities, ensuring I had ample opportunities to build new connections. As I gathered my presentation materials and headed toward my car, I reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from what had initially seemed like an irredeemable betrayal. I had discovered resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I had found new purpose in educating and empowering others. I had learned to distinguish between relationships that nourished me and those that diminished me, and found the courage to prioritize the former while setting boundaries around the latter. Most importantly, I had reclaimed the essence of who I was apart from my roles as mother, employee, caretaker, roles that had defined me for decades but had sometimes obscured the woman beneath them. At 64, I was finally learning what it meant to put myself first, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect, and a recognition that my needs and dreams were as valid as anyone else's. The community center was already filling with attendees. When I arrived, men and women in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, some accompanied by adult children or caregivers, others proudly independent. I set up my materials at the front table, exchanging greetings with the other panelists, a local attorney specializing in elder law, a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit, and a social worker from Adult Protective Services. As the room quieted and the moderator introduced our panel, I surveyed the attentive faces before me. Each person had their own story, their own relationships, their own challenges navigating the complex terrain of aging in a society that often devalued and marginalized its older members. If my experience could help even one of them avoid the pain and betrayal I had endured, then perhaps it had served a greater purpose than I had initially recognized. "Good morning," I began when it was my turn to speak. "My name is Barbara Wilson, and a little over a year ago, my children emptied my retirement account for safekeeping. Today, I want to share what I learned from that experience, not just about financial protection, but about standing up for yourself even when those closest to you insist they know better." As I shared my story, the betrayal, the legal battle, the emotional reckoning, and ultimately the reclaiming of my power and future, I saw recognition in many eyes, heads nodding in understanding. I wasn't alone in my experience, and neither were they. There was strength in that knowledge, in the shared determination to maintain dignity and autonomy regardless of age. After the presentation, an elderly woman approached me, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped her cane. "Thank you," she said, her voice quavering but resolute. "My daughter has been trying to convince me to sign over my house to her for estate planning purposes. After hearing your story, I'm calling my own lawyer tomorrow." I squeezed her hand gently. "Trust your instincts. You've managed your affairs all these years. You haven't suddenly become incapable because you've reached a certain age." She nodded, straightening her shoulders. "Exactly. I raised 4 children and ran a business for 30 years. I think I can handle my own house. Thank you very much." We shared an understanding smile, 2 women refusing to be diminished by others' assumptions about our capacity. As I watched her walk away, head held high, I felt a profound sense of contentment. The painful chapter that had begun with the discovery of my emptied retirement account had evolved into something I never could have anticipated: a new beginning, a reclaiming of self, and perhaps most unexpectedly, a way to help others claim their own power. That evening, back in my cottage by the lake, I added final brushstrokes to my mountain landscape, signing it with a flourish before stepping back to assess the completed work. It wasn't perfect. The perspective was slightly off in one corner, and I hadn't quite captured the quality of light I'd been aiming for. But it was authentically mine, an expression of how I saw the world and my place in it. Like my reimagined retirement, the painting represented both an ending and a beginning. The painful betrayal that had threatened my financial security had ultimately led me to a richer, more authentic life than I might otherwise have created. By standing firm in my own worth and refusing to be anyone's victim, I had discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed and possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine. As the setting sun cast long shadows across my art studio, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey, difficult and unexpected as it had been, that had brought me to this peaceful moment. The Barbara Wilson who had once defined herself, primarily through service to others, had evolved into a woman who honored her own dreams without apology or explanation. It wasn't the retirement I had planned, but in many ways, it was better. It was mine, shaped by my choices rather than others' expectations, rich with new friendships, creative pursuits, and meaningful work. The betrayal that had once threatened to define my later years had instead become merely the catalyst for a transformation that was still unfolding with each passing day. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.